So I think it's always, hi, thanks for being here. Uh, I always think it's important for people listening to somebody talk to know a little bit about them, and it's John did a beautiful job, and thank you. Um, but at a very personal level also. So I'm probably the only person that you will have met that's 100% Icelandic. This is where my family is from. We have a farm in Iceland that's still in my family, that's been in the family for 670 years. In this place, the farm is called Grafargili, and it's in Undandarfjörður, Iceland. So I, however, grew up in Chicago, and this is what I loved as a kid. I watched that building go up, by the way, when I was in junior high, and I loved this. Because when you're a person of the prairie, suddenly this horizon and sky are actually more visible to you than the ground. And so I became fascinated with that relationship of space and sky. That's the farmhouse, and that's a real Viking that you're looking at there. For what it's worth, this is where my great-great-grandparents are buried. The house used to be here, and an avalanche knocked the old house over and killed them. So that's the family graveyard. So when I graduated from Harvard, I got to meet they bring in a big speaker. It was Mother Teresa. So I got to meet her. And little did she know I knew who she was. She didn't know who I was, of course. But her advice to me was grow where you're planted, which is a really beautiful thing. And so because of that, I always try and remember these roots are very real. So we are landscape architects and urbanists. We, within the firm, have architects, landscape architects, planners, geographer, graphic designer. And we're in that little building there, right next to the Leipzig Art Museum. And we've been there for almost 20 years. We are a co-work community. Within our building, we have, there's about 15 architects, lighting designers, architectural photographers, a sustainability engineer, public outreach specialist, a transportation planner, IT firm, all in the same space, not in different offices, but we all just have desks next to each other, which is really cool because we're a creative village of multidisciplinary people that obviously we have a lot of fun. And we have, these are my toys I have in the office. We believe in multiple intelligences. And what that means is we bring people into the firm who have grown a deep understanding of who they are, what they care about, and how their mind works. Because if everybody thinks the same, we don't need people who think the same. We need people who think differently than we do because we attack problems that are new kinds of problems, and therefore we need multiple ways of thinking to attack those problems. Now, I'm going to back up. It's extremely important, just like I talked about 670 years of personal history. It's really important to understand where you are in a moment of time. My thesis at Harvard was actually about the relationship between design and time. And for many, many years, I taught in the university a seminar that was just on the relationship of design theory and time, going back 500 years and looking at how culture and technology at any given time influences design values and outcomes. Because what you'll find is that based on the technology you have and the culture you're within and the environment that you're situated in, you will see very, very different theories and ideas and techniques to perform design and different outcomes as a result. So we're trapped by who we are. But landscape architecture is a field that generally we think of as being slow. Like graphic design, fashion design, these things change pretty quickly, right? Like every year there's a new style, not in landscape. Landscape architecture is now changing very rapidly. So landscape architecture, so a little bit of history, and then we'll go into some of what I really do. What you're looking at here is the University of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson, of course, but the Idealism, the first period of landscape architecture in this country, was about the idealism of democracy. So you're looking at a level playing field. And the notion here is that if I go to this university, I can enter onto this level playing field and be an equal citizen with equal rights and equal opportunities. And the physical design of the space, the symmetry, the flatness, symbolize and signify that level playing field of opportunity. And it's something that was held in common belief. So this was a new country, and people wanted to believe this, and consequently they made spaces like this or the Denver Civic Center that are there as to claim that we are a fair and democratic society. Now, people don't look at Denver Civic Center and think that way anymore. You have to have a scholar or somebody like me to raise that as a question. Today they think of it as having different purposes. That's because we're in a different time. Central Park is part of this idealism. Olmsted was a great advocate for public health and social equity, and he believed that bringing nature into the city, and as you know, this place is 100% a designed place. This is not a natural place. His idea was if we bring nature into the city, all social levels of the city will have access to the same thing, and that by contacting and living within nature, you would somehow be more healthy. And that's a broad assertion, but it's an assertion that goes with the notion that nature is an antidote to urbanism. And that is something that I personally challenge. I do not think nature is an antidote to something. There's another, my friend Beth Meyer from the University of Virginia has a series of lectures on the relationship of the city as masculine and nature as feminine, and that duality, which is similar to, you know, the city is bad, nature's good, therefore it's somehow an antidote to badness. But this is actually what Olmsted believed. But Olmsted did something very important in Central Park. He introduced the idea of motion, moving through a landscape as an activity of health. Now, it is in fact an activity of health. I'll get to that later, but this movement we enjoy. If you go to Central Park this Saturday, I was there last Saturday, this is what it looks like. If the weather's nice, there are going to be somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people in Central Park on a Saturday, and they're all doing one thing. They're going in a circle. They're walking, they're biking, they're, you know, I don't see any rollerblades, but they're in pedicabs, they're on horses. My favorite is I used to love to run Central Park, and I was running, you know, it's a 6-mile loop, so it's a perfect, great training loop for marathons. And I was running, and all these people are coming at me running like this. And I thought, this is very odd. Which one of us is going the wrong direction? And finally, I got all the way around the 6 miles, and I crossed the finish line. It was the Norwegian backwards marathon. Go figure. But this idea that people are just going in circles because as it's a genetic imperative to move in the landscape, it's part of safety, it's how we pace our territory, it's how we understand our domain, etc. That Olmsted took to the Fenway in Boston, lived here for several years, and you can see he's restoring nature, he's building a green infrastructure to, this is really about real estate development, but it's about the movement through the landscape as a healthy and romantically scenic or naturalistic, quote, scene. Then in 1934, there's a big shift. This is Fletcher Steele and his famous garden Namkeg. The first time the word modernism appears in Landscape Architecture magazine is in an article by Fletcher Steele in 1934. And if you think about it, modernism was a term that was in daily use in 1910 in architecture, engineering, industrial design, fashion design, graphic design. But it didn't get into our magazine until 1934. The reason I'm pointing that out is we had this big hangover from Olmsted, this romanticism about people and nature and this idea of antidote held landscape architects back. Part of my personal mission in the field is to change that thinking. So this is a garden by my friend Jim Rose in New Jersey, or Dan Kiley, another friend, in Columbus, Indiana, the Miller House. And at this period, or here, Paul Friedberg and Larry Larry Halprin. And these are, believe it or not, I actually know all these people or knew them when they were alive very well. And because I set out to know my heroes, I felt it was very important. That's what you need to do. Find somebody you admire, get to know them, learn from them, find out what makes them tick so that you can be a hero to somebody else. What you're seeing here is you went from this incredibly, almost sublime reduction of modernism to a patterning, what I'll call a mannerism. In other words, these are metaphorical pieces of nature, and especially if you read Larry Halprin, which is on the top. This is all about mimicking nature and bringing the abstraction of nature into the city to give that experience. But then this guy came along, Ian McHarg. He was a great friend and had a wonderful accent. When he came to lecture at Harvard, I picked him up at the airport because I had worked with him at Jones & Jones. And he was, Grant Jones always said, Ian McHarg's only problem was he was born 400 years too late. And I got him in the car and I said, Ian, open the glove box. And in there I had a pack of Lucky Strikes and a pint of scotch and 2 glasses. And he goes, real gentleman. And so we smoked and drank scotch all the way driving from the airport and until this started his lecture, because that's how Ian liked to live. Because he was on the moors with his battle lance, killing. He had to kill. That's a good joke, and it's also true. He was a trained assassin for MI6 in World War II. And few people know that, but it's true. Ian brought this immense amount of force to the idea of landscape and people living and residing in landscape. He's about as forceful a personality as you will ever meet. And what he did, this is the woodlands, he introduced the idea that you could do a mapping analysis of the suitability of places for living or for any purpose. And so if the slope was too steep, you shouldn't put a house there. If the soils were wetlands, you shouldn't put a house there, that kind of thing. So he was introducing this idea of a pseudoscience of map analysis in landscape. And these were all assertions. There was little evidence to support what he was doing. But because it was the environmental movement, and he personally is responsible for me becoming a landscape architect, he was very inspiring that somehow there was a discipline that could address the problems of the world, the environmental problems we were experiencing, as opposed to that modernist perception that you would make a sublime landscape or you would make a pretend waterfall in a public plaza like the Halprin work. And now each of these are valid forms of work. I'm just letting you think about how, as time goes on, different ideas, different technologies start to infect and change how a profession looks at itself and the world. So this may have been a suitable place to build, but I think you can agree from an urbanist point of view, there's nothing unique about it as an urban situation. It's just an ordinary suburb. In fact, it's a fairly high-end suburb that excludes people of color, etc. And this became incredibly popular. This is land design research. The town center for Reston, Virginia. I actually worked for this firm in 1972, which is when this was built. And here you see Lady Bird out enjoying this nature. And the idea here, because of McHarg, is we'll compact the city bits so we can save the other bits. It's a perfectly reasonable notion, but it's still only kind of like 1 or 2 ideas. Then my really dear friend Martha came along, and Martha and I we've been dear friends for years. And she was trying to knock people out of that mode that everything had to be a science, that beauty, inspiration, and provocation were okay. And she was successful at that. Then she married Pete Walker, and together the mission that they set out on, which you see here, is the idea that if they could simply make landscape as design pure, gorgeous, incredibly well-crafted, highly restrained, so that it could be seen as an important object in the same way that a building could be seen as an important object. So this is about trying to get professional respect by objectifying landscape. Again, now ask yourself, what does it have to do with social equity or justice? What does it have to do with environment? Does it have anything to do with science? Does it have anything to do with public health? And the answer is probably not, because it's such a focus on this objectification, formalization, and craft in the delivery of landscape, because this is a political statement. Just like I mentioned about Friedberg and Halprin, this is George Hargraves. It's actually a woman named Jamie Maslin who was at my office for 10 years. She left me to go to New York to do this project, which is South Point Park in Miami Beach. And you can see this idea of mannerism. Think back to those concrete fountains that are supposed to look like nature. Well, here clearly this is a form that's highly intentional, highly considered, and this represents the mountains and this represents the wetlands. But it's a mannerism of form and style, and not necessarily a functional mountain or a functional wetland. The High Line is another example of this. I actually chaired the peer review on the High Line. I worked on this 4 separate weeks a few years ago. And it's a fabulous novelty. It's beautiful, it's cool, but it's a novelty because it's a terrarium in the sky. There's only 17 inches of soil here. And so what's happening at the High Line is that they constantly replace plants because they can't actually sustain plant life in a natural way. So ask yourself the question, is it good? Is this what we should be doing? Now, its social benefits are starting to wane, but it's had an impact. But again, it's because New Yorkers got together and realized we could do something cool. So the cultural ethos is let's do something cool. It's very cool. People show up, they use it. I'm not sure it's going to be here in 50 years because it's unbelievably expensive to maintain when you have to replace a hefty percentage of the plants every year. I have this, I call this slide being alone together. And it's something that is extremely important to people. We are moving into this period where instead of seeing the city as a set of objects or didactic presentations by power, we now start to see the city as a place of sharing. So we have all sorts of sharing, and you guys are part of that generation, understand it probably better than I do. But how we share space is also here. And this is having a tremendous impact on how we think about the world and the relationship of us, you, the land, our culture, and our technologies, because as you all know, wherever my phone went, the world's in here. And my most current thinking and themes about the design of public spaces is this, that if I design a place and you go there and you have an experience that matters to you, you take a selfie and you tweet it, you post it, you send it to your friends. And other people see that and they become interested in that experience or that place, so that places are becoming the nexus of community. Go back to Jefferson, where there was that flat space that was designed to signify a social paradigm. Today's space, through human experience, activates a social paradigm. So you as designers of public space are actually creating communities which do not yet exist. And that to me is the next wave of the future in the design of public spaces. How do we activate the development of community when in so many ways people think that these things are breaking communities down? Think about whether it's Egypt or ISIS or whoever you want to talk to or talk about, the way that social media and these things are being used, many, many people think is highly disruptive. I'm here to tell you that as a designer, you can use this to your advantage to build community. So, I'm going to show you a little movie. This is a site that we designed in Calgary, Alberta. It's an island in the Bow River. You can see downtown. That light's sort of right in the wrong place. This was an island that was flattened. There was a campground, a car campground, like a KOA. Thank you. And so this is a fun little movie that we made about it. My current thinking about public spaces is all about what public space means to people. Because in today's world where we live in our phones and our technology, how we share our experience is how we build community today. You know, if I come here and see you and we take a selfie and we post it, our friends see that and they'll go, oh, what's that island? And maybe they'll go there and share that same experience. St. Patrick's Island in Calgary represents to me
my most advanced thinking about how people and nature can come together in a city, because what we did was we restored an island to make it much more natural than it was, but then we inserted a whole range of different activities which are connected together, and people just love this place.
When I first started in my career, I thought it was all about design. What I've learned is that accomplishing design is not so difficult. Giving meaning and value to design is a much higher order of sophistication. And getting things done can be very difficult.
I'm going to show you some of these projects in more detail.
How do we work within an economic context? How do we work within a political sphere? How do we revive an environment that's been completely paved over and bring life back into the city?
Half of the art of design is in thinking and listening and learning about what the place means, what it is, what it means, what people think it could be. And design comes out of looking for the intersection of all those feelings and meanings. We like to refer to design as creating social intersections.
The design process to me is a bit chaotic, but it's intended to create discovery. It's not intended to bring closure. It's intended to begin thinking so that we can find new associations of thing to thing, of person to person, of place to place, of idea.
So that's an overview of how I think. Today. So a few projects. This was the North Embarcadero in San Diego. You can see there's a pier, that's a parking lot, that's a cruise ship. This, by the way, is where the War of the Pacific was run by the U.S. Navy in World War II. And it's a working waterfront with cruise ships, dinner cruise ships, tour ships, water taxis, America's Cup boats that you can rent and go out on, the USS Midway Museum, etc. And this was seen as completely unacceptable waterfront for people. So the theme that we developed is, how do we make a working waterfront that welcomes people? So these are some renderings that we did. You're looking at about 5 years of design development and public meetings. We built it, and we are still working on this. I'm right now working on extending. This is 1,000 feet long. We're now working on an additional mile of this. So people have fallen in love with what we did. We felt we should create a signature for the waterfront, so these really cool light fixtures that we designed. There's a number of sustainability stories here. Those pavers that you're looking at are locally made with local sands and mixes, and it's a mix that we designed, the paver that we designed. And there's a little movie here that'll allow us to, I'll talk about it. So right here, you can't see it, that's right there. For thousands of feet right here, there's a trench underground, which captures all the urban water. That water spills into this trench and is distributed with plants and sand and gravel before the water is released into the lake. These pavilions are designed to be white. During onset 3, rates very little 3, these gates have to go down towards the explosive. And every vehicle that goes on here has to be mirrored before they go down. So there are tremendous technical issues that we deal with in designing places like this to still make them both comfortable and fun for people. We're working on a new hotel right here right now. This is a building that's only 5 years old and has permission to tell the public to care of that. Because people love this waterfront so much, we've decided to recapture that fear of people. These palm trees are jewel palms. They're date palms that are no longer producing dates, so they're a reused palm. And as you can see, people know what to do here. They don't need instructions. This has become the most popular place in the city in just 1 year since growth. Lots of fun things like that's ladybug, and it casts a shadow on the ground so you read word lead. We're expanding the San Diego Convention Center. So these areas that are in green are the expansion, 450,000 feet of expansion. And this is the old convention center. And of course, as you might understand, people really dislike the fact that the convention center, quote, walls off the waterfront. So in adding 450,000 feet, we said, well, we've got to give something back to the public. So starting here at a 1 in 20 slope, you can walk all the way to the top of the building, where right here there's an elevator. You're 82 feet above the first floor at that point. And this is 5 acres of public park, accessible 24 hours a day, so that the building itself becomes a new park for the public on the water. And it's a really cool view here because the SEAL training base is right across the bay. So there's all sorts of cool stuff that happens on the water here. These are porous concrete bands with 24 inches of soil. You can see it's kind of wet. We pump today 150,000 gallons of briny water out of the foundations of the convention center every day. And that water goes into the sewer system, where it requires a lot of energy and money to clarify that water before it's released back into the bay. And what this does, this is Spartina cordifolia, saltgrass. This grass, we will take that pumped water and introduce it here, and it seeps through. These are slow dams that allow that water to seep through. And we believe we can, our calculations suggest we can clean 100,000 gallons of water a day by the salt uptake of the salt grass, and allow us to put that water into the storm sewers where it goes back to the bay instead of to the sanitary sewers where it has to go. There's a number of activities on top of the building, plus an amphitheater space for 3,000 people on this lawn, 60 feet up in the air, with an elevator, which you can't quite see here, that's big enough for a box truck, so we can put a big band on top, drive the truck right in, go to the top of the building, set up a concert. And what that does, the reason that's important, is this park is where they hold concerts today. So for the entire summer season, this park today is not accessible to people. So we'll take that activity away from the real waterfront and put it on top of the building, where we just regain all that space for the public. In Tampa, we're under construction with a $36 million park right now. You can see it's a neighborhood of mixed race. This is the old black neighborhood of Tampa. I personally started this project by doing 45 one-on-one interviews with people from the neighborhood to understand the history and story of the neighborhood. And the entire program of this park comes from those stories, those lessons, and a series of public meetings that we held. So this is what the neighborhood used to look like. This is the Fortune Street Bridge. The park is here. But the park, that neighborhood, the center of the old black neighborhood, was removed for urban renewal as a kind of racial cleansing. And this park was built. And if anybody ever draws this, you shouldn't graduate. I mean, that's the funniest thing. But this park had become, by the time we got involved 3 years ago, this park had become nothing but crime. I mean, nothing but crime took place in this park. And it became a very serious problem. So working with the neighborhood over a year and a half, we came up with an idea to remove the seawall. This is where the seawall is today. There's a big storm sewer, or sanitary sewer right here. So we'll build a new seawall. This is actually built right now, with a community center that's a boathouse below and a community center above, so that we can have, and this is all agreed to now, the city is going to hold classes and rent canoes, kayaks, stand-up paddleboards, and we're also moving the Dragon Boat Club. There are 12 dragon boats that go into this building, plus 150 crew boats and sculls. Sculls, the 4s and 8s, will go into this building. because this is a fantastic water sheet for paddling. But if you're new at it, there's also motorboats here, so there's a wake. So we've created this floating boom where you could go in here, pick up a paddleboard, come down here, go around, put it in the water, and have a wake-protected environment to learn how to do stand-up paddle or kayak. You can see there's a number of other sports fields, etc. A huge emphasis from the community on family picnicking, which is here. A very, very large playground. There you get a glimpse of the paddle center. Just, you know, various renderings of what this park might look like. So you can see there boats below and community center above. The building is built right now. They're pouring this second floor right now. The design activity here is important and a lot of work, but the political activity and the programming are much more work than the design. And it has fabulous views back to downtown. So this is kind of there's a joke hiding in this. This is for a design competition. When we do design competitions, we always break rules and include jokes. So this is Lord General George Simcoe, the founder of London, Ontario. And he stayed in town exactly 3 days and never came back. But they still see him as the founder of the town. So we found this portrait of him, and then we made up this other silly stuff, this portrait of him. And we called our project the Ribbon of the Thames, which is the confluence of two branches of the Thames River, where downtown comes to the river in this historic photo. But today it's the back of everything, a bucolic scene from the 19th century of the same site. This is what a downstream view looks like today. There are actually real fish in this river. And an overall master plan. This is just presentation from the design competition. But without going into what's going on here, we're adding a new bridge in this location, armoring an existing sandbar here, building a paddle center here, so this will become the safe paddle pool, and then making this thing we call the Ribbon, which is just a fabulous experience, plus a series of playgrounds in that location. There's theory that goes into the design of public space. First it starts with a loop. So you can walk all the way around the confluence. Remember, this bridge on the left is not here, so you can't really connect this space. And then the idea of triangulation, that I can see from one place to another and see, oh yeah, there are people over there. Maybe I should go over there. And just a variety of renderings of what this thing is going to look like. We do a ridiculous number of renderings. Then in Minneapolis, we're working in a suburb called Wayzata. It's a very wealthy suburb 12 miles west of downtown. And this railroad is here. You can see the railroad filled into the lake. This is Lake Minnetonka, a gorgeous, very, very large lake. And Main Street is behind the railroad tracks. Well, it's still like this. And the funny thing is, there was a guy named James J. Hill who was the head of the railroad. And he lived in Wayzata, and he got in an argument with the mayor in like the 1880s. And he purposefully put the railroad tracks here to spite the mayor. And I'm not making that up. And it's been a problem for 140 years ever since. So here you can see the railroad tracks. And that's Main Street. So it's a one-sided Main Street. But you can't really see the lake because the railroad tracks are raised. And you're not allowed to go anywhere along here because it's all railroad property. So we organized the community to develop this set of ideas, which are now, by the way, fully approved. The environmental impact statement is completed, and we are starting to move into final design on this now. But the idea is to restore the shoreline marsh. So without getting too technical, this is a water quality pond that's been there for many, many years, but which is no longer functional. We're going to reclaim that, for wetland purposes and build an underwater reef of rock. Because what's happened over the years is that this part of the lake is very shallow bank. And in fact, all of downtown was a wetland 200 years ago. They just progressively filled it in. And because of the wave activity of boats, the shoreline marsh gradually eroded away from propellers and weight, so that there are no plants there anymore. And so by building an underwater reef of rock, we will be able to fill soil behind that and reestablish that marsh. And that system will extend for a full mile along the edge of the water to restore the lakefront. We're developing an ecological education center in an historic house that's in that location. There's a fishing pier. What I'm trying to show you here is we work at all these different scales. So this is about community. This is about one-on-one relationship to nature and this gorgeous lake. That's what the town looks like. We're redoing the town parking lot and Main Street. So this is just different configurations. We're developing a town beach with a big jumping platform and 2 new buildings that include a boat rental, bathrooms, and food services. And then this walkway that connects things together, and just fun little things. So there's this entire underwater reef that's through here, but because we're filling into the lake to do that, every time we touch into the water is another environmental issue. So this entire system is a series of bridges. So there's a foundation here, foundation there, foundation there, and instead of having like a boardwalk with lots of columns, these are actually bridges that we lay out into the water to minimize impacts. Now, I said something about public health and Olmsted at the outset, and in fact, on Thursday I'll be meeting with her in New York. She and her team came to me 4 years ago because I also lecture internationally on the relationship of design and health. What you design has a direct impact on public health, and it's important to understand that. So NYRP, the New York Restoration Project, by the way, she's really shy. She's really smart, really sweet, really shy. We discussed, could NYRP today, they own 52 community gardens in the city. Could NYRP get beyond simple things like community gardens and start investing in systemic change within difficult neighborhoods? So we selected this neighborhood, Mott Haven, Port Morris in the South Bronx, and we have been working with NYRP, the Columbia School of Public Health, Columbia University School of Public Health, and a group of neighborhood activists. And what we've done is we've, through a community process, developed a project that is based in public health metrics that have been established by Columbia and the Montefiore Hospital System with the intention, we've made some great discoveries I'll talk a little bit about, but to say that urban design and greening a very challenged neighborhood can have a direct benefit to public health. And what we will be doing here is we will build the project, and Columbia and Montefiore have agreed, we've already agreed on a set of health metrics. They will monitor health metrics within the neighborhood for the next 20 years to see, in fact, if the project improved public health. So it's actually a public health experiment that we're doing, and I think that's extremely cool. We don't have to sound too critical of the neighborhood, but you can read this for yourself. This is the unhealthiest neighborhood in the state of New York. That is a sidewalk. There is a sidewalk, but all the cars are parked on. This is the waterfront. That's the Triborough Bridge in the background. So in a series of community meetings, which are really, really fun, I mean, I love working in New York City because people get engaged, they really care, and they are basically no BS. They tell you what they think, and you can take it or leave it. It's just so fun. Columbia did this literature review and found some incredibly important things. And if there's one thing you remember, it's this. What this says is that parks that are 6 acres or larger have a significant benefit on asthma, diabetes, and body mass index. This is not an assertion. This is a finding from a clinical research study in the Northeast. So that, from a public health researcher or an epidemiologist, is extremely important that you've actually found a correlation between a park and public health indicators. Now, what the study also found that's not here is that there were none and negative correlations on public health between parks that were smaller than this. So little parks in bad neighborhoods in New York have now been proven to damage public health. Parks are bad for you. Isn't that interesting? First, let me go to this, and I'll come back to that. When we got this study, I sat down with Gina Lovato and Rupal Sanghvi, our 2 public health researchers from Columbia, and I said, why do you think it is that a 6-acre park makes a difference and a little park doesn't? And what they said was, immediately, very quickly, they said, well, there's an increased length of stay in a bigger park than a tiny park. So that probably means people have time to relax, better for your mental health and stress levels. You probably are breathing a little bit cleaner air for a longer period of time, all believable. And the second, they said there's probably an increased level of activity because in a larger park, I can at least walk from here to there. And if I'm in a top bottom corner, there's not a lot of walking going on. I said that I don't think that's enough. I said, I think what's different is the motivation to go to the park is different. There's a different motivation to go to Central Park than there is to go to the playground. Entirely different motivation. And what's important here is how do we get these communities to become active and safe and therefore trending towards better health. And we have to find those motivating means. It turns out the little parks, the problem is that in neighborhoods like Monthaven, air pollution is so bad and trucks are so aggressive that kids in playgrounds, teenagers in basketball courts, are exerting a lot of physical activity and damaging their lungs because of poor air quality. So exercise in those environments is bad for them. And mom has got a supersized shake at McDonald's and she's just sitting there gaining weight and getting diabetes. While the kids are hurting their lungs, she's hurting the rest of her body. And so what we said is we can't buy 6 acres in the South Bronx, so what are we going to do? So we theorized that we could make that getting to the river, getting to the waterfront would be motivating. That we actually know, that's true. It's also true that air quality is significantly better at the water than it is in the heart of the neighborhood. So if we could motivate people to get to the water and create a sequence of connected little parks, little events, a new pier, another new pier, a big playground and skate park, green streets with bike paths, maybe we could attract people to the water and sort of like a shopping mall keeps you walking because there's another store. If we can have this sequence of activities, maybe we can increase the level of activity and the length of stay by making a loop out of this project. This is what Columbia University has now agreed to adopt as the hypothesis of the research, or what they like to call Mark Johnson's theory of change. So it's my theory of change that we're going to test. So another thing we developed with the neighbors is a lot of neighborhood engagement here. I'm skipping over so much detail. This is what it actually looks like to walk to the waterfront today. And this you could do with a community-based effort. People in the community, if the city would buy their NYRP, we would just buy them paint and the little sticky bottles. We could just go do this next weekend and start to implement that. Another key finding from the health research is that public health projects that have been developed through community participation and agreement have a significantly higher improvement of public health than ones that did not engage the community. Why? Because they have ownership. So that's why I show you this slide. If we can organize people in projects here, and there's 15,000 people living in public housing projects just 4 blocks away. We can organize them to have a series of weekends and go out and just implement this stuff. You know they're going to use it and they're going to care for it, they're going to protect it. So that's a fundamental role that designers can play to start to uncover things like that. And then, of course, over time, we can come back and make real improvements. And so there's a bunch of these. I'm not going to go through them. So the idea is to have this incremental set of interventions. So these are then the metrics. I won't. Okay, so activity, transport, and physical activity. This is from Columbia School of Public Health. They're going to measure the percent of the population with self-efficacy, behavioral control, and positive beliefs relating to physical activity. Or you get the idea. So a design program that's entirely based on public health metrics. This is our announcement. We love this. So the media was here. You can see that's NBC here. And this guy's the borough president. And where is she? That woman right there is the assemblyman for the legislature. And we are getting money together to go build this. I'm getting close to being done. I know it's long, but in San Diego, I've been working on this project for 13 years. We have defended 5 lawsuits against this project. In July last year, we won our final lawsuit in California Supreme Court, people fighting this project. Since then, we've been sued 2 more times, but my client group has decided to proceed anyway because we know we're going to win those lawsuits also. Now, welcome to California. Balboa Park was built for the 1915 California Panama Exposition as a city boosterism thing. There's this beautiful bridge, the Cabrillo Bridge, and you can see there were cars here. In fact, the first car was carrying Teddy Roosevelt, who rode in a Model T across this bridge into the Plaza de Panama. And this is what that road looks like today. This is what the center of it looks like today. Now, so there, just look at that. Now I'm going to quick go back. This is what it was. It was a people place. This is what it is. It's all about cars. In fact, this plaza has 54 parking spaces. On a typical Saturday, 14,000 pedestrians and 8,000 cars mix in this space. And I could show you video, it's just a nightmare. And as I like to say when I show people the video, I don't think this is a park experience. It's just cars going like this and people trying to get through. So we have been trying to remove the cars. I've worked on this 13 years. My client is a local billionaire. And the reason they're fighting us is that they are afraid that the local billionaire is going to have his way with our public park. And that he's going to brand it as a corporate park. They make up all this stuff. In fact, he's a wonderfully, wonderfully nice man. And he has stepped up to give a $79 million gift to the city of San Diego. And because he's willing to spend so much of his money to improve the park, people assume that I'm corrupt and he must be destroyed. I'm not making that up. I have led, ready for this, 200 public meetings in 13 years to get this project approved. So here's where cars drive through today. This is called the California Quadrangle. This is a National Landmark Historic District, the Museum of Man on the left, the Old Globe Theater behind. That's the Museum of Art, the Mingay Museum. Balboa Park gets 14 million visitors a year. There's 23 museums and the San Diego Zoo are in this park. I assume some of you know this place. So we are going, this shows removing the cars, closing the street, removing the parking. building this public plaza as a central gathering place and restoring it to its intentional original purpose, which is just to have an urban plaza surrounded by culture in the middle of the park. That's the Spreckles Organ Pavilion, the largest outdoor pipe organ in the world. Concerts every Sunday at 2. This is a parking lot that we've turned into a parking garage. There are 900 cars underneath this view with 3 acres of park on top. We're introducing a free shuttle system within the park. This is the new visitor center. This is what people hate. We have to have a bridge to surround the complex to snake cars through the park and into the parking. I have personally studied, and our environmental impact assessment studies 21 alternatives to this. And there's no question in my mind, this is the best balance of issues. So that's the parking garage seen from above with the new playfield on top. And here you get an overview. So this is called the Prado, the Plaza Panama, the Esplanade, Organ Pavilion, the new parking garage. And there you can see the cars are able to snake through. So then I think just one last thing. No, I think I'm going to show you St. Patrick's again. So maybe 2 things. This is downtown Los Angeles where we've worked for many years. And this is Pershing Square, the original town square of the city of LA. And if you want to work somewhere fun, if you want to work somewhere really grueling, go to San Diego. If you want to work somewhere really fun, go to LA. These cities are like night and day. The cultures are entirely different. So this is Pershing Square today. It was designed by Legaretto and Olin partnership in the mid-'80s. And they started designing in '84. And it sits on top of 1,500 cars of parking. And it's riddled with problems of crime, drug crime, sex crime, homelessness, panhandling. And it has never been successful from the day that it opened. And most people think it's the most blighted part of Los Angeles. So here's what we are going to do with it. This is my partner.
Design can be about forms, about disciplines and other things. And this project, we really focus on people and how people live in the city could be better. That's really the strengths of our team. They bring diverse ideas, but somehow slowly you see ideas weave together into a strength. And now we're seeing the Curate idea turn into this amazing, unique vision.
Don't you remember California in September?
Pershing Square, I think, is a great place for people to get regrounded in the history of Los Angeles, regrounded in our past that have been erased. And by doing that, we're getting better grounded in whatever's to come in the LA of the future. This is a place that historically has always been about, can people come together? And not just come together to sit and play chess or read the paper or whatever, but come together to raise their voices. And there's a kind of democratic ethos that is born out of the kind of ground zero of this city.
Young people who contribute the elements of culture, they need free public space. And if there's a natural place that cries out, this is a stimulating place, they will go there. That's why Central Park works, that's why parks in Chicago work, that's why parks in Vancouver work.
In building the city, they've cleared a lot of the hills and topography as an efficiency to bring in the highways. And I think bringing back this idea of topography, it creates new pockets to experience the park and experience the city, and really brings the park to life.
When people come into Pershing Square today, they slow down. So that tells me there are really good qualities of the space, that people do feel like they're a little bit apart from the city. And I just love that change of pace, which is already here. So how can we expand on that?
Pershing Square has the possibility of being a favorite place that you feel connected to. It's very possible to actually enlist a form of membership. If I'm going to park there for a year, maybe instead of just paying for parking, that check I write them makes me a friend of Pershing Green. I actually get out of my car, walk up the escalator, and walk through it, and enter a little world of transition.
How people cross streets into the park is really critical. Right now, it feels very impermeable, lots of walls. How do you make it so that people can enter at any point in the park on some levels? And I think that prepares them for a different kind of use for the park. You're already sort of getting them prepared for something different.
And that's, I think, what every downtown deserves and needs is a destination type of public space. And it really provides a place to reconnect with nature in a way that I think everybody will benefit.
We have this idea, we call it a test kitchen, that we can bring arts and culture, music and food out of the neighborhoods of downtown into the green and showcase that talent as civic gesture.
I love the idea of bringing together the food, the arts, the culture of LA into one place. And we work in parks all over the country, and we always look at all the different sources of funding. And we're convinced that if Pershing Green has a real base of support in not only in downtown LA, but the cultural organizations around it, that can be a meaningful source of income for the park.
This creates a place where people can walk in and actually experience Pershing Square from different perspectives, put their own lens on it, see it through their own eyes and from their own vantage point, and really have a different experience that they help create.
For Angelenos, they love the freedom of being able to create. I think that what Pershing Square will be is this catalyst for more of that Angeleno free spirit.
It's no secret that there's a significant drought that's taking place. But if we pump the water out of the foundations, we can store that water in cisterns that we can create out of the old garage ramps. And we can store enough reused water to irrigate this park 100% of the time using no domestic water whatsoever.
We're not designing Disneyland. This is not a place people go for vacation. This is the people actually live there. So it's so crucial that in our design, we go right back to the roots. We talk about people, we talk about traffic, we talk about air, we talk about all these subjects that are vibrant to our quality of life.
Okay, just one more thing. Back to St. Patrick's Island. So this is what the island looked like when I first saw it. And I came walking across, there's a pedestrian bridge. And I was coming down the bridge and these two guys came running out of these tents and they're like, "Hey man, join our movement, join our movement." And so that same afternoon I had a meeting with the mayor. And I said, "Mayor, something funny happened out on the park. There's all these people camped out there." Now this park was an island years ago. It's where Calgary began. It's the original ford where natives and the RCMP could cross the river, settlers could cross the river. And so they often hung out camping on the island as a defensive space. But in 1920, it was turned into a car campground, with Model Ts. Like I said, it became like a KOA. But then here's all these tents. I said, "What's with all this tents on the island?" He laughed and he said, "That's the mayor." He said, "Oh, that's Occupy Calgary." I said, "What? Aren't they supposed to be down like by the big bank?" He said, "Oh yeah, they were. And they were creating a big problem down there." So I went down and I met with them and I said, "Guys, this is the tourism heart of our province. And you're really creating a bad name for Calgary by protesting here. So would you please move to the island? And we'll send the TV cameras over and you can protest over there." And they said, "Oh yeah, sorry. And they actually moved. And we love our Canadian clients, but every single meeting, there's this one woman who's got the best accent. I always say something to poke at her, and she goes, "Oh, sorry." We did a bio blitz. We had 50 scientists from the University of Calgary and the Calgary Zoo over a 24-hour period, including over 100 families, and we collected species, found about 1,200 species on the island, to give us a baseline of what was the biomass of the island today, what was actually happening there today. We came up with this scheme. Those tents were right here. We came up with this scheme that gives life back to the island, ecologically speaking, and geomorphologically speaking, and that inserts people and people activities in a series of strategic ways to introduce fun activities in nature while making people healthy because we're bringing them into nature and giving them activities, but also making nature more healthy at the same time. These are some renderings from our initial design. Another thing, the same mayor, I said, and a really big hill for sledding. And I said, and a really big fire on top. And I said, can we have that? And he looked around and goes, I don't know, could we do that? And we did. So this year, during sledding, the Parks Department carries wood up there and you can make a fire and have a bonfire. You could never do that in this country. And this, we call the seasonal breach. This is where the tents were. Through aerial photo research, we found that in the 20s, when aerial photos were first being taken, there actually was a place where water flowed across the island every year and had been filled and riprap to make the campground. And we said, let's bring the breach back. We also found a long linear wetland, which was an ancient breach, and we lowered that and brought that back. So we've put life back into it, and of course it's, you can skate on it in the wintertime, and as people in Calgary say, only 3 months of bad skating. So we actually built it. And it is an unbelievable hit. This is, in 1 year, has become kind of the most loved place in Calgary. So the last thing I'm going to show you is a fun little movie that I made about this island. And I'm not making this up. It was really cold. I had forgotten to bring a jacket because I didn't look at the weather forecast. And we took a bicycle and we got this big video camera on a gimbal so that as the bike moved, the camera would more or less stay steady. And then I got on the bike and started riding, and with one of these on, I just started talking. The reason I'm explaining that to you is how informal this movie is. And we had some drone pictures, you'll see, etc. This movie actually won the Alberta Film Society Award for Best Corporate Movie of 2015. And we just did it for fun, but we won an Oscar.
I like the idea of it being a flowing experience, more of a little bit of a tour. Is my mic on?
It is.
See, I'm trying to think about the camera angle. Hop on your bike, we're rolling. Here we are in East Village in Calgary. This is one of the most exciting urban redevelopments I've seen. We're building new streets, new apartments, a new library, a new performing arts center, and we've been involved in making the public places. Nothing like a beautiful morning ride. There's nothing I'd rather do than ride a bike like this. You really feel like you're part of the landscape, and you can also ignore traffic rules. Try not to crash. It's about 8 or 9 degrees, crispy. Everybody's looking, wondering, why has he got that funny camera on his bike? This forest is probably about 60 years old and is a result of the last major flood. These cottonwoods only reseed effectively after a flood. There's so many stories like that we want people to know. We looked at old photographs and we found that 80 years ago, there used to be what we call a breach across the island. We recreated that breach and actually created a new channel for the river that cuts right across the middle of the island. So here's a little feature we call the transect. This is about 600 feet long and it cuts right across the island. And we're about to cross something we call the lowland channel. This is something we created. In another year, it'll be a wetland. We created little islands for songbirds. But it's really a way to experience the island in a whole different way. We've got a little plaza space, amphitheater,
places for school groups. We've already seen one school group sitting right here out just talking about the restoration of the island. Everything about this island is accessible, which is something we just believe is very, very important. One of the ideas that we had is how can we make this island feel safe? So you can always see ahead. Oh, here's Claire. Hey, Claire. So we have public bathrooms, some interpretation, give you the history of the island and where this project came from. We might get stuck in the muck. Yep, we're in the muck. There's a large hill in front of us we call the Rise. When we dug out the breach or the new channel, we had this extra soil, and so we made this hill. So you can get up on top of this hill and look back at the river in downtown, and people downtown can see you. This is a special place to come, interesting place to be. People told us it wouldn't be possible to get a permit, do such massive construction, to cut a new river through an island and to make a big hill in the middle of the floodplain. But we were able to do that because there's so much restoration that we're doing here. It takes a team of different kinds of minds to design something like this. And the design ideas come from everyone. They come from that entire team, not just from one or two designers. I think that the reason the island is already successful is that the design is based on some really truthful things about this place.
So we've actually already won 20 awards for that in just the last year. We won one yesterday from the Chicago Athenaeum, and global awards too, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, that's my story.